All right, welcome back everybody. So today we are going to implement a dash system. Now it doesn't work super well with my camera right now, so I'm just going to get it like to the edges here. But that's our dash system. So it's going to work until we run out of magic, and then when we run out of magic you can mash that button all you want and it doesn't do anything. So let's jump right into it. Okay, jumping right in. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be taking a look at how to make a dash ability using a tweening system called DoTween, which you can find at the asset store. I've used it in previous videos in this tutorial series, so if you like you can jump back and check one of those, or if you just go to the asset store and search for DoTween, when you import it into your project you'll get which one of these, Demi-Giant is the folder that will come with it. So you'll notice that my UI looks a little different here, and that's because I'm using Unity 2019.3, which is currently in beta, but I really wanted a new UI, so I went with 2019.3. Even though it's in beta, I haven't had any issues yet, and nothing I'm doing right now wouldn't work in an earlier version, 2019.2 or any of the 2018s or 2017. Nothing I'm using relies on something 2019.3 has. So to remind you where we were last time, we had made a generic ability system here. The generic ability class inherits from scriptable object and has just one method in it, and that's ability. And that ability takes in either the player's position, facing direction, the player's animator, in case you wanted to add an animation, or the player's rigid body. Now, from here, we're going to make a new class that inherits from this and is going to essentially be what our dash ability is. Before I do that though, I'm going to add a few more variables to our generic ability. So there's a few things that I'm going to want pretty much every ability to have, and if I don't want them to have it, I can just put them in 0. The first one is a magic cost, so I'm going to make a public float that I'm just going to call magic cost. Depending on if you're using a magic system, it could be stamina or whatever you're using. I also want to have a duration of the ability, which is going to be a float, and I'm going to use this in the movement in order to create a coroutine that waits a certain amount of time before resetting the player's state, so that we don't accept any input during the ability. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a reference to the player's magic, which in this restructured version of the project is a float value. So I'm going to make a public float value. I'm going to call this player magic, and I'm going to do the same thing for a notification, which is my new name for signals, for use player magic. So public notification use player magic. Alright, cool. I'm going to save that and go back into Unity here really quickly, and let's make a new script once Unity is done thinking here. Alright, so in my scripts, under scriptable objects inside abilities, I'm going to right click and create a new script, and I'm going to call this one dash ability, and let's open that up. Now instead of inheriting from mono behavior, this is going to inherit from generic ability. And I had originally thought that all of this create asset menu stuff would come with it as part of its inheritance, but since it's outside of the class, it doesn't. And that's why it doesn't come. I think I mentioned this before, that I didn't quite know why, and it's because it's outside of the class. So when I create a new ability, I want its menu to be dash ability instead of generic, and I want the name of it to be dash ability. Also, since I'm going to be using DoTween, I want to add a new using tag to this. So I'm going to add using dg.tweening. Come on now. There we go. Autocomplete decided not to work for a second. Okay, and I don't need the other two. I won't need system collections or system generic. And scriptable objects don't receive start or update, so I can just remove those. So now let's kind of talk through what we want our dash ability to do. So the dash ability is going to take in the player's current position in space. It's going to use a force, meaning like an amount that it wants the player to dash, and then it's going to move the player in the direction it was last facing by that amount, but we're going to use the rigid body to move it so that we can still respect collisions. So I'm going to make a reference here to an amount of dash force. So I'm going to call this a public float dash force. And now I'm going to override the generic ability method. So if I go back into generic ability here, what an override does is when you're inheriting from a class, like we are here, let me just copy this. When you're inheriting from a class, if the base class has a virtual void, you can override it in the child class by using an override void. So then we can, instead of having it do what the base class does with the ability method, we can have it do something different. So I'm going to paste this in here, and I'm going to need to change this from a virtual void to an override void. And we're going to leave all of these arguments the same. Now what we want to do first is we want to make sure the player has enough magic. So we're going to check the player's magic value. So if player magic.value is greater than or equal to the magic cost of this ability, then we're going to decrease the player's magic. Minus equals magic cost. And then we're also going to raise the signal to tell the magic system to update the UI. So use player magic.raise. Now if we don't have enough magic to do this ability, we're just going to return, meaning to exit the method without doing anything. Now the next thing is I want to check to make sure that we have a rigid body, because the default version of this void doesn't necessarily need a rigid body. So I'm going to say if player rigid body, meaning if it exists, then I'm going to create a new vector 3 that I'm going to call dash vector. Dash vector is equal to, I want it to be equal to the player's position plus their facing direction normalized times the dash force. So player rigid body dot transform dot position plus, since the facing direction is a vector 2, I have to cast it into a vector 3 because that's what the player's rigid body transform is. So vector 3 player facing direction, let's put this on another line so it's not getting too crowded. And I want to normalize it so it's not longer in the diagonal than it is in the cardinal directions. Dot normalize times dash force. I think that's, yeah, that's all I need to do. I don't need to do like time.delta time on this. So then I just want to do the player rigid body dot do move, and you'll only get this do move if you have dg.tweening, if you downloaded doTween. And it needs to know an end value and a duration, and then you can also do snapping. We don't need to do snapping. So the end value is the dash vector, which is why I added the original player's position to it. And the duration is duration, which is why I added that to the base class. So this is the ability. Now we have to be able to call the ability. So let me save this really quickly. And let's take a look at our player script. But if you missed anything with the ability, go ahead and check it out now. Okay, so looking at our player movement here, I'm going to add a few new variables to our player's movement. The first one I'm going to add is going to be a reference to a current ability. So this is going to be a serialized field. Private generic ability, and I'm just going to call this current ability. I'm also going to make another vector 2 for what the last movement was. so that I can have the facing direction. Actually, let's call that facing direction. And I'm going to default it to vector2.down, just like the temporary movement vector. Okay, now the next thing I need to do in my GetInput here is I want to check to see if the GetInputDown weapon attack, I'm going to add else if input.getButton down ability, and I set up the ability before, but I'll show you how to do that right now. So let me save my script. In Unity, they have a new ability system, but I'm still using the old version of it. If you go to Edit, Project Settings, and then in Project Settings you can go to Input, where is it? There we go, Input Manager. I have an ability set up, and I have it left over from my Mac version of this, so let me just change it to left control. And make sure that you click away, because if you click away and it doesn't, like it disappears, you entered the name of the button incorrectly. And my default is joystick button 1, which I believe is the B button. Maybe it's X. It's B or it's X on an Xbox One controller. Doesn't matter. So I've got my ability here. What I want to do is I want to start a coroutine, and that coroutine I'm going to make right now. So I've got my weapon code. I'm going to make another one for public IEnumerator, and I'm going to call this ability co. And this is going to take an argument. It's going to take a float of the ability duration, so that I know how long to wait, so that you can have some abilities that are longer than others. So I'm just going to add the yield return new wait 4 seconds ability duration. Now what I want to do is essentially the same thing I'm doing here. First, let's go to our state machine, which I have as a separate component in this version of the project instead of having it be part of the player movement. And I'm going to add a new state. So I've got receive item. I'm going to add ability. Be careful when you're adding new states like this, because enums have a tendency to remember what was where. So I'm adding a new state ability, and I'm going to make sure it's always in that spot. Back in player movement here, I'm going to change my state. So my state dot change state to generic state dot ability. I'm not going to do anything to the animator, and then when this is all over, I'll do my state dot change state to generic state dot idle. Okay. Now, a couple things. First, I need to set this facing direction. So when we're moving, which I have, yeah, okay. So I'm checking my temp movement here. If temp movement magnitude is greater than 0, I'm going to set my facing direction to be equal to temp movement. And if it's not greater than 0, meaning if we're not moving, I'm not going to do anything to it. So I'm going to leave it to be whatever it was the last time that we moved. And after we change our state to ability, let's check to see if there is a current ability. If there is a current ability, then we're going to do current ability dot ability, and we're going to pass in our transform dot position, our facing direction. For the animator, I'm just going to pass in anim.anim because I have that as a separate component. And then for the rigid body, it's going to be my rigid body for the player. And if it's not the current ability, else So if there isn't an ability, I'm not going to make the player have to wait an amount of time. I'm just going to return null. Okay, sorry for that weird cut. Actually, it's probably better if we don't check for the current ability after we've already started the coroutine. That doesn't make any sense. So, oops, I didn't mean to delete all of that. So I'm just going to remove the if statement and then the else that comes after it from that. And then we'll tab that over. There we go. Now, in our GetInput here, after we're checking to see if there's the ability button was pressed, we're going to say check for the current ability here. So if current ability, then we're going to start coroutine, ability co, and we're going to pass in that current ability dot duration. All right, now one thing that I don't know why I didn't do in this version here is I don't know why I didn't add a return if the character's in the attack or ability state. I added a return up here, so if my state, it'd be better if I had, since I'm going to have a bunch of them rather than having a bunch of and statements, I'm going to have a method here, just a little Boolean value. And I'm going to call this is restricted state generic ability dot, or not generic ability, generic state dot, wait, I want to do, oh yeah. Okay, there we go. So now I want to say if current state is, we're going to check if it's generic state dot attack or current state is generic state dot ability. What else do I want to do? Let's just do those two for now, and then I can add as I go here. Return true, and if it's not those, return false. So in my, before I even call GetInput, let's say if my state dot, isn't it current state? No, it's my state dot my state is not a restricted state. And so to check that, I'm going to say not is restricted state. My state dot my state. Sometimes the way I name things is weird. There we go. Then we'll do GetInput and let's put set animation in there as well. I'm going off script here. I'm thoroughly off my notes, so I'm sure this is going to be bad. But I don't feel too bad about it, so let's check this out. So if I go back in here, let me make sure that everything was saved before I check and celebrate not having any syntax errors. All right, cool. Now, let's create a new scriptable object for my dash ability. So in my scriptable objects folder, player, ability, right click, create ability dash ability. And I'm just going to call this player dash. I'm going to say the magic cost is 1. Duration is 0.3 seconds. My player magic is, I think it's this one. Yeah. And notification is that one. And let's set the dash force to 3. Now I haven't put it on the player yet. If I look at my player here and open that scene where I have my movement, I should have, yeah, I've got an empty spot for my generic ability. Now if I play my game and hit my left control, hopefully nothing breaks. Okay, cool. Nothing breaks. Good job. Now, if I assign an ability here, so I'm going to assign the dash and hit play. Hopefully, the player will dash. So I don't have an animation for it. You can see that my magic's going down. And if I'm out of magic, the camera needs some work because it doesn't keep up with the player very well. But there we go. We got a nice little player dash. So next up, we're going to restructure the arrow to be part of these abilities. And then we'll do a few other abilities, and then we'll talk about how we can restructure them to be part of the inventory system, so that you can use the inventory system to select which ability is the currently active. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know in my comments down below. Really quickly, I have a Patreon. I haven't posted new videos to my Patreon in a while, but there are still good videos on that Patreon if you've been following the series. There's a video on using a virtual joystick. There's a couple of videos on lighting, and so on. Video on making sure that you have transparency effects when you move behind objects, stuff like that. So it's worth checking out. For as little as $1 a month, you can subscribe to that. Otherwise, check out my Discord, follow me on Twitter, and I hope everybody has themselves a wonderful day.